My name's Cordy. I'm a guitarist from the United Kingdom. I live in a little village that you won't have heard of, but that's fine. I run a YouTube channel as well. I play guitar, obviously. And on that channel, I'm interested in quite a lot of different pieces of gear. The Line 6 Helix, fractal audio stuff. I also experiment with real amps. And what I'm really interested in is gear and tone and how those two things come together and how we can create music out of those bits and pieces, and in a way how the gear can inspire different musical interactions with our instruments. And I'm here today to talk to you about my Henriksen Bud. The very first time that I can remember seeing and hearing about a Henriksen amp for the first time, I went to university in a town called Bath, and there was a guitar teacher there. His name's Stuart Ryan, and he brought to a lesson one of these tiny little amps, and he had this archtop jazz guitar with him, and he said, look, I've just got this new thing, check out how it sounds. That for me has been how I kind of always remembered Henriksen. It was this amp that looked small, was easy to carry around, but at the same time had a really quality tone. And there's actually probably not too many brands that even do this sort of thing, so Henriksen stuck in my memory for that reason. So the first thought when I received this amp, you take it out of the box and you think, right, this is a small thing, right? And you're expecting this sort of tone when you plug it in. So my first guitar that I grabbed was the Gibson Herb Ellis, the jazz boy. And I plugged it in and I started to play. Now there's an onboard reverb, which for me, I always prefer an amp to have a bit of reverb, especially if you're playing at home. And so I plugged it in, I started to mess with the volume and stuff, and started off with just having it, really quiet, and thought, okay, well that just sounds good. It doesn't sound small, it sounds good. And then I started to turn it up a bit, and I was like, well, that's as loud as I really ever need it to be. One of the things that I really like about it is the EQ they've got along here. You've got the low mids, the high mids, the high. They've also got a helpful kind of 80 hertz, 420 hertz, and 1.6 kilohertz. So it's giving you some idea. It's not just okay, this is mids, this is low. It's really clear what it is that you're actually affecting tone-wise. You've also got an effects loop here as well. So one of the things that really interests me about this is I use a Line 6 Helix or a Line 6 HX Stomp, and ordinarily you experience playing these things through what we call FR monitors and this sort of thing. And for me, when you plug into those things, if you've got an IR on your actual preset, they can tend to then sound a little bit boxy, and you're then kind of in this mode of, right, I need to tweak things to get it back to sounding how I want it to sound, so it doesn't sound kind of small, or it doesn't sound like there's phasing issues, because you're essentially putting the model of a speaker through a speaker, and you get these kind of colorations in tone. Now, I experienced this with a friend. We just took this to a room and he had a traditional FRFR and I had this. And I plugged in my HX Stomp just into the return. I turned off the tweeter, which is really handy as well. You've got an off button for your tweeter, which is great. That's really handy. And I just plugged into it. I was using my normal presets. I was like, okay, well, that's the end of that then. It just sounds how I wanted it to sound, and I wasn't messing around with anything. And we were just playing, and it was sounding big and full. And that really is the experience that I've always wanted to have with an FRFR speaker, but generally it's not been the one that I've actually ended up having. So not only can I use this for the traditional amp thing with a jazz box, I can also now take this out with modelers, and that for me makes it a really, really useful piece of kit. There are a few ways that you could use a modeler with the Bud. For me, I've tried just taking the HX Stomp and you take the output straight into the input of the Bud. And because you've got that really active EQ there, you can shape the tone and make that feel and sound as natural as you like. What else is cool is you've got an effects loop, so you can do what's called 4-cable method, hook it up with that. And that's a way that you can have a drive pedal in front of the preamp here. Or you could even use like a Vox AC15 type preamp from your Helix or your Fractal Audio and put that in front, and so it's acting then like you're playing a different style of amp through the Bud. And then you can put your time-based effects after, and it's a really effective way of getting more out of the modeler, but also being able to use the inbuilt preamp here too. You could use that for some clean tones, and then you could kick on a different preamp within your modeler for drive tones, or you can just kick on a drive pedal. There's all sorts of things you can do, and also you can have your delays and reverbs and stuff remain kind of crystal clear because they're after the preamp section. So that's what I like about this amp. There's a few different ways to do bits and pieces, and it's really quite flexible in that way. Another aspect that I like to do when I'm recording kind of more traditional jazz guitar, if you're using a microphone with the amp, I also like to have some element of direct signal, just because you then get a slightly more complex tone and you have more to work with. What I like about the Bud, you've got an XLR out, a direct out. So I've been blending that with my microphone in front of the Bud. And that's also a way that you could do some silent recording if you wanted to. So it's really handy in that way as well. And if you're on a stage, instead of putting a microphone in front of it, you could send from the XLR out to your front of house. Something that's not totally obvious about this as an amp, so you see it's got this small kind of compact size, and you're maybe used to seeing kind of lunchbox amps in this kind of format. And what's cool about the Hendrickson Bud is that you could also use a traditional guitar cabinet with it. So if you were, for instance, thinking, right, I've got this really big gig coming up and I'm wanting to be really loud for it, you could take, for instance, a 4x12 or a 2x12 or anything really. You've got an 8 ohm output here, and you could use this to run a larger cabinet. I think that's something that's not necessarily glaringly obvious from seeing the Hendrickson Bud, but there is this little 8 ohm output, and I think that could be a way forward for me taking this thing out. If I know it's going to be a louder gig, I might take an additional cabinet with me. With some amps, you're kind of limited by the transformer that's in there between, some amps won't necessarily work in Europe if they're made in the US. This is not the case with this amp. So you can take this anywhere in the world, and because of the way that they've set up this IEC cable and the transformer, this will work anywhere in the world. Now I think that's pretty useful, especially for people that are going to be touring these kinds of amps. So not only is it a small, very travelable amp, not only does it have an XLR out that can go to the front of the house and, plenty of volume to cope with most gig situations, it's also going to work at any stage in the world because it has a power supply that can cope with that. Thank you for stopping by to check out this video. Thank you to Henriksen for putting together such a cool little amp. If you want to see more people discussing how they're using their bud and see it being used in different scenarios with different instruments, there's a series called Artists and Their Amplifiers on YouTube. Check that out. But again, check it out. It's a really cool little amp. And I should probably stop saying little because it doesn't really sound like a little amp, but a really useful tool, I think, for many gigging musicians. Cheers.